Hello YouTube, it's Clormo with another Logic Pro X tutorial in my second season series of videos, and I'm gonna be talking again about another synth. This time the turn goes to the ES E standing for ensemble. And before we go into the tutorial, as usual, I just wanted to remind you that this video is also part of the current running round of the Amazon gift card. All you need to do is be a subscriber and comment on this video or any of the previous videos, and the winner will be announced not on next week's video but the week after that. So in 2 weeks time, whoever wins, if somebody wins in this round, will be announced then. Another note that I wanted to make too before going to the video is that this synth is a little bit simpler than the ones that we have seen before, and you will notice that right away. So due to that reason, I will take a little bit more time in going through the different options. Even though it's an overview type of video, I will make sure to cover all of them instead of focusing just on the differences, because then otherwise you wouldn't, if you're looking at this for the first time, then it might be a little bit confusing to follow. So without further ado, let's go into the video. I have here the ES E interface showing there. So the first thing is that the ES E, it's ideal for making warm and pad, like warm rich pad sounds and ensemble sounds. So with that in mind, again, taking into account all the other tracks that I have here for the different synths that I have covered so far. So when taking into account what the ES E it's better for, then that gives you a quicker way of creating those type of pad sounds without having to go into the more complex synths like the ES1 or Alchemy, which is a video tutorial, as you know, if you have been following, it's upcoming in the next few weeks. Another thing that I wanted to make sure that we understand before going through all the settings is that the ES E is also a subtracted synth, right? So it has an oscillator and an LFO parameters, and you can shape the contour of the resulting waveform similar to the more simpler synths that we have used before. So the only reason I'm saying that is because the previous synth that I covered before this one was the EFM1, which was FM synthesis, which is a little bit different. So I just wanted to make sure that your mindset is set into subtractive synthesis if you have been following. If you're new to this series, then I encourage you to look at the previous videos for the other synths so that you are not too lost. So let's start with a quick overview as I've done before, from left to right as applicable, right? So the first thing that we have is our oscillator parameters. So the oscillator parameters are composed of this wave knob and then this pitch buttons here. I'm gonna be talking about those after I cover them, the rest of the interface. Then we have our LFO parameters, which is these two buttons here. You have your vibrato and your speed, and I'm going to be talking about a little bit more when I cover. So moving to the right, we have our filter parameters, which is our cutoff and resonance knobs, which you should be familiar with this by now if you have been following my previous videos. Then we have our envelope parameters, which are these two knobs here, and our attack and release. Also the velocity volume knob, it's part of what would be the envelope parameters. And then you have the output parameters, which control the overall or main result or main output of the whole synth or instrument, if you want to see it like that in this case, which includes this effects area here. You have 3 buttons similar to the pitch buttons, and then your main volume button. Then at the bottom we have our extended parameters, which only include some bend and tuning functions. There's nothing that groundbreaking that's included. So let's go now back to the beginning, to the left, and give a little bit more detail. So the oscillator parameters, as I've said in the beginning, then you have your wave knob, and the wave knob, what it does is just sets the waveform of the oscillator. And if you notice, you have a sawtooth type of waveform, a pulse width type of wave, and the pulse width is determined by the width of that pulse is determined by where my knob is located. If it's all the way to the left, you have a sawtooth. So we have seen this before in other sense. And you have also your pitch buttons, which are set in octaves, right? So it's it still has that nomenclature of feet, right? It's 4, 8, and 16 feet. If you want to know why Logic uses the term feet, go into my previous video, specifically the ESM, where I cover that a little bit more detail. It's not that super important to know. It's only that you can go up and down in your pitch range, right? So the lowest setting is 16, the highest is 4, and so on and so forth. Your LFO parameters down here, just below the wave knob. Just to recap for those that are seeing my videos for the first time, talking about synths. The LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and it creates a cyclic waveform that is used to modulate the waveform that I'm selecting here with this knob. So what this does is shapes that waveform a little bit more, and for that we're using this button here is just nothing more than the intensity of that LFO modulation, and it's known as the vibrato and pulse width modulation knob. So when our wave is set to a sawtooth, the intensity is gonna result in a vibrato type of effect, right? Depending on its intensity and the speed. So these two are tied to and the result is tied to the waveform. If I go around to the right into the different pulse width that I can achieve with the knob, then my intensity button will cause a pulse wave. That's why it's called the vibrato pulse width modulation knob. So and the speed is nothing more that just sets the frequency of that LFO modulation that I'm putting into my waveform using the vibrato PWM knob. Just a note that I want to make here, and when I play my usual MIDI notes, you're gonna notice that real quick, is that when the pulse width is very narrow, the signal is gonna sound interrupted, and you're gonna see that. So when you're setting your intensity here in this knob, you have to be a little bit careful that you don't insert that artifact into your waveform. So something that's recommended is that you don't go past the 50% range of that rectangular wave, so that you attain the maximum modulation range without introducing those artifacts that the intensity may give you. Now moving to the right, we have our cutoff and resonance, which are our filter parameters, and the AR intensity and the velocity filter are also part of that of our filter parameters. So it's this contour right here to the right of my waveform or my oscillator and LFO parameters. So The cutoff knob, if this is the first time you're hearing this term, is just controls the cutoff frequency, and then the resonance knob is boosts or cuts portions of that signal that are around that cutoff frequency. So that what that does is creates or shapes the wave further into a like if you were using I have mentioned before, like if you were using some an EQ and then you're cutting frequencies off graphically and just letting some of the frequencies pass and others not pass. So that's what your cutoff and resonance buttons do. A note as well, if this is the first time you are introduced to these concepts, the increasing the resonance will reject the low frequencies when you're using a low pass filter. So keep that in mind. When moving to the right, we have our attack and release intensity, and this is very simple. It's just sets the amount that of cutoff frequency modulation that's applied by the envelope generator, which are our attack and release sliders. So if it's set all the way down to 0, then this has no effect or little to no effect on the modulation that's applied to the cutoff frequency. Then your velocity filter knob, it just sets the velocity sensitivity to the cutoff frequency of the cutoff frequency modulation, I should say, that's applied by the envelope generator. So again, if the intensity is set at 0, there's the attack and release or the envelope will have no effect on the cutoff as far as the velocity of the notes go. So I can put that all the way up and it's not gonna affect my attack and release, and therefore it's not gonna affect my cutoff and my resulting waveform. Moving to the right to our envelope parameters, then we have just the attack and release. And if you're again watching this for the first time, your attack slider will set the time that's required for the signal to reach the initial signal level. So it's how fast or how slow your input is going to register in the for the note that you pressed. And then the release slider will do the same thing, but it's going to set the time that it takes for the signal to fall off from that level. So you press your note, your attack determines how fast you get to that full note volume, and then the release time, it's how much time, how fast or how slow you reach its death, right? Like how fast or how slow you come out of that sound, which is, I hope, self-explanatory, but since I'm trying to explain it as if it was one of the first videos and take some time on it, that might be a little bit confusing if you haven't heard about that before. But anyway, moving on, then we have our output parameters. Your volume sets the overall output level of the instrument, so that's very self-explanatory. If you have it all the way down, you will have no sound. All the way up, you have the full volume intensity of it. And then moving down here, your velocity volume knob will set the amount of velocity sensitivity that's incoming by the MIDI note events or your MIDI notes. So if I just bring up my piano roll real quick and make this a little bit smaller. The different colors here in my MIDI notes means that they have different sensitivities. Red meaning that it has the highest, and then as it makes it bluish or cooler, then means your velocity is a little bit less. So let me bring this back up again. What the velocity volume knob does is that it's gonna be affected, right? Your volume is going to be affected by the amount of the MIDI note velocity. So in layman's terms, or more simpler terms, that means that when your MIDI notes have a higher velocity value, then each note is gonna sound higher when you press your keys, firmly. And at lower values, then the response is gonna be so low that it won't matter. There won't be any difference if you play the note in your keyboard softer or harder, because your velocity volume sensitivity would be down. That would be the case here. If you set it up, then pressing a note firmly, regardless of the velocity that it has, it will sound a little bit louder. Okay, so now let's move to the extended parameters down here at the bottom. And again, like I just said, well, let me go back here. Your chorus 1, 2, and ensemble are effect buttons, and your chorus 1 will give you a typical chorus effect, and then your chorus 2 has a little bit stronger modulation, so it's gonna sound a little bit warmer. And the ensemble button, which kind of should be like probably the first, if you think about it, the synth being called the ES Ensemble. But anyway, it just gives you a fuller and richer sound because it has a much more complex modulation routing. So this is just going to introduce effects of everything that you have done prior, right? Last but not least, you have your extended parameters, and there's nothing much to say here, only that you have your positive bender range, negative bender range, and tuner. Please determine the downward range of your pitch bend, and the positive bender range is determining your upward bend range. So both go down and up respectively by 2 octaves or 24 steps, right? So 12 steps is 1 octave, 24 is 2 steps. And then your tuner is just you can fine tune the whole instrument by sense. So it's sense because it's a fine tuner. So I'm gonna recall the default now, and I'm gonna play these notes and do some changes here so you can see what effects they have. But I'm gonna shut up now and not talk anymore. Let's just listen to what we have here with the default. Interrupt quick to notice that interrupt sound or artifact that I was talking in the beginning. Lower frequency, higher frequency. Faster attack, slower attack, faster release, slower release. have any of that information, so this is not going to do anything. This is a subtle, very subtle tuning because it's in synth. So, and last but not least, as with many of the other synths, you have some presets that you can use and you can explore, so that way you can see what the different settings do and what sounds are achieved, and that way you can decide if you want to further use the synth itself for particular sounds as opposed to trying to sculpt a sound from scratch. You can probably use the ESE to feel a need that you have for a particular set of sounds that you commonly use in your music, like for example for pads, like it's the ESE is suited for. With that, I'm gonna leave you for this tutorial. Keep in mind that in the next video I'm gonna be talking about the Evoke 20 or the vocoder synth, and that one's gonna be a little bit more interesting. It's probably gonna be a longer video than usual. Thanks to everybody again for supporting. Make sure that you find me in social media and every other outlet in the online that I'm putting my work on. Comment, subscribe, share, like, send me questions, requests for future tutorials and all that good stuff. See you in the next video. Peace out, YouTube.